Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. My name is Paul Emmerich. I was born in Berlin, raised in Queens, and I haven't heard a single sound since I was 4 years old. Meningitis, they said. Could have taken my life, but instead it just took my hearing. Since then, the world has been a silent movie, except the colors are real, the vibrations are loud, and people often forget I'm even in the room. Which, in a place like this, might actually be a good thing. I work in Site R7, officially registered as a Cold War-era decommissioned facility outside of Montrose, Colorado. In reality, it's a modernized, billion-dollar luxury survival bunker, carved out beneath the Cimarron Ridge. Funded by a handful of West Coast billionaires and Central European aristocrats, the place is about as far from a doomsday hole in the ground as you can imagine. It has climate-controlled biospheres, hydroponic farms, gymnasiums, drone access tunnels, and even a private spa. It's meant to house 70 people for up to 5 years without resupply. I know this because I helped install the water filtration and carbon scrubbing units, and I was offered a permanent contract to maintain them. Because when the world ends, the rich still want hot showers. They call us the Essential Five. 5 staffers hired not as guests but workers, kept on to make sure the lights stay on, the toilets flush, and the oxygen keeps circulating. We're not residents. We live behind security doors, don't eat with the elite, and our rooms don't have walnut paneling or hand-woven rugs. But I didn't come for luxury. I came because it was safe. When I got the offer last year, I'd been scraping by in Denver doing industrial HVAC inspections. My knowledge of air compression systems and water pumping controls made me useful. But what really got me the job was the fact that I didn't mind the isolation. "You're already used to a quiet life," the recruiter had joked. Now, here I was, 45 feet below ground, in Module C, performing a scheduled filter replacement on the primary air intake scrubber, wearing gloves slick with activated charcoal dust. That was the day the alert came. I didn't hear it, of course, but the whole wall shook. I felt it first, a deep, bassy thud through the steel frame of the corridor. Then red light poured into the maintenance bay as the Level 5 security protocol lights activated overhead. My wrist unit flashed a message in bold text. "Containment lock initiated. All access gates sealed." I dropped the filter, pulled off my gloves, and sprinted to the nearest terminal. The touchscreen confirmed it. All surface hatches sealed. All vertical elevators locked. All drone tunnels shuttered. We were locked in. Which should have meant we were safe. But then I saw the note at the bottom of the alert, tucked into the system admin logs. "Breach reported in docking chamber 2:18 minutes prior to lockdown." I stared at it. The docking chamber was where last night's transport arrived. It brought in new shipments and, according to the guest manifest, a small handful of additional VIPs. I hadn't interacted with any of them. The Essential Five weren't allowed in the arrival wing. But if there was a breach before the gates sealed, I pulled open the internal cameras on my maintenance tablet. Most were dark. Many VIP areas had privacy protections in place, but some of the public lounges were still visible. I tapped through them. One after another, empty. Then I hit one labeled Pantry Level 2 Lounge Subsection. The feed stuttered, then showed a still frame. There was a man standing with his back to the camera. He was barefoot, shirtless. Something was off about the way he stood, arms slightly out, like he was trying to keep balance on a moving boat. His shoulders heaved with each breath. Then I saw the blood. It glistened down the back of his legs. Not his blood, someone else's, splattered in chaotic arcs across the walls, trailing down from the ceiling tiles. He turned around. Even in grayscale video, I could see his eyes were fully dilated. His mouth hung slack, jaw twitching. He took 2 staggering steps toward the screen, and then slammed his head into the camera. The feed went black. I dropped the tablet. That was 12 minutes ago. I've since sealed myself into a service tunnel on level 2, using a manual crank door that can't be opened from the outside. I've rerouted my wrist terminal to a secondary mesh network that still works, though it's spotty. I've messaged the other members of the Essential Five, though only one responded. Caitlin, Rue, our head nutrition systems technician. She's a Navy vet, early 40s, from Galveston, Texas. I always liked her, direct, competent. She knew about my hearing loss, never made a big deal of it. When she got my message, she sent back a location ping and a line of text. In kitchen cold store, locked in. Saw 2 of them. They're not normal. The others haven't replied. We were 5. Me. Maintenance, ventilation, and life support. Caitlin. Nutrient systems and hydroponics. Eduardo. Electrical grid and power routing. Nishant. Digital security and AI monitoring. Carla. Internal transportation and drone logistics. That list might as well be a tombstone now. I paced the narrow tunnel, my eyes flicking to the ceiling pipes. Water lines, backup oxygen, chilled coolant from the geothermal systems. They all vibrated slightly. Normal operation. So the systems were still running. For now. But someone would have to reset the backup cycle for the CO2 scrubbers in 12 hours, or the air mixture would start to degrade. That someone was me. Which meant I had to move. I opened the access panel, checked the tablet map, and plotted a path to the life support control core. It would take me past one of the staff corridors, uncomfortably close to where I'd seen the man on the camera. I holstered the only weapon I had, a telescoping torque wrench made of solid steel, and set off. The corridors were too quiet. I know that sounds ironic coming from someone who's deaf, but there's a different kind of silence in underground spaces, a pressure that builds when nothing else is moving. I could feel the lack of vibration. No footsteps, no machines rolling, no fans switching. That meant something wasn't right. The lights flickered as I crossed into the C3 corridor. I passed Carla's office. The door was ajar. I paused, 1 foot inside. There was a low, rhythmic vibration pulsing through the floor. A movement. Something was in the room. I crouched and slowly peeked around the corner. It was Carla. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, her hands covered in blood. Her eyes were open but unfocused. Her lips moved, whispering something to no one. Next to her was her terminal screen, shattered. Behind her, the wall was streaked red with handprints. Her own? I waved. Nothing. I stepped forward again. Then she turned her head, sharp, fast. She saw me, and lunged. I dropped the wrench, threw my weight into the doorframe and slammed the door shut just as her body slammed into it. Her fists pounded against the steel. Her mouth opened wide in a silent scream. Her teeth, bloody. Her hands, raw. I backed away, heart hammering. She wasn't Carla anymore. I bolted. 15 minutes later, I was at the life support core. I locked the door behind me with a manual override key, something the VIPs didn't even know existed. The displays confirmed what I feared. The CO2 scrubbing cycle was nearing critical. I pulled up the valve routing schematic and began manually adjusting the intake balance. It took 7 minutes. I had to work fast because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. When I finished, I slumped to the floor and checked my wrist unit again. A new message blinked from Caitlin. They're fast. One was banging on the kitchen blast door. I reinforced it, still holding. "Where are you?" I sent a ping. Then she added something else. I heard the guests talking before it started. One of them was sick before the gate closed. They didn't tell anyone. It tracked with the timing. Someone brought it in, and we were locked in with them. I checked the personnel roster. 36 VIPs had entered the facility over the last 4 days. Most of their rooms were in the E and F blocks, off limits to us. But the environmental controls there had been acting up lately. I'd accessed them once or twice to reset humidity ratios and balance the CO2 scrubbers. Normally, doing so required a supervisor code from the control deck, but I'd found a way to bypass it using the older Cold War-era backdoor interface that still sat buried under the updated UI. The owners never bothered to remove the legacy controls. They assumed no one else knew how to use them. Now, that decision was either going to save me or kill me. I pulled up the zonal HVAC overlays and thermal imaging grid. The luxury suites in Block F showed heat blooms in almost every room, but not the kind you'd expect. Human bodies at rest give off a steady 36-37 degrees Celsius signal in thermal, but what I saw were erratic, pulsing signatures, some flickering with violent movement, others slumped and cold. In Suite F03, one of the signals looked like it was climbing the wall. I zoomed in. The timestamp blinked as the image refreshed. The figure was pressed against the corner, its body twisted unnaturally. One arm dragged behind it, the shoulder clearly dislocated, but it moved anyway. Like pain wasn't even part of the equation, just movement. Blind, instinctive, frenzied motion. Whatever they'd caught, it was past viral. It had reshaped their nervous system. That kind of altered behavior, the lack of self-preservation, the detachment from physical damage, spoke to severe neurological compromise. It was no longer just sickness. These people had been neurologically overridden. And they were still locked in the most secure part of the facility. For now. I shut the panel and turned to check the air filters again. The last thing we needed was a loss of breathable air. The geothermal generator was stable. The secondary circulation fans were holding at 82%. Power draw was high, but manageable. Then the tablet chimed again. It was Caitlin. Just saw one of them in the elevator corridor, not Carla. Tall, male, no shirt, had a wristband, VIP. She followed it with a second line a few seconds later. He heard me move, charged the door, cracked the outer glass but didn't break it. I tapped back a quick reply. "Stay put, I'm in life support core. I can monitor access levels. Do not use main corridors. Infrared sensors picked up at least 5 fast movers in E-block spine." Then I paused. If one of them had a wristband, he could have access. I opened the internal permissions table and pulled up the VIP access schema. Unlike the Essential 5, VIPs had biometric level privileges. Most of the facility used layered access, card, wristband, and biometric scan. But the VIPs had override access to 90% of the sealed sections, especially those labeled medical isolation, communications, and executive safety lock. That last one stood out. I'd never been inside the executive lock before. None of us had. It was located 3 sublevels beneath Block G, buried under an elevator that required both physical and voice print authorization. According to Nishant, it had its own air supply and power cell. Rumor among staff was that it was a fallback vault for the facility's top-tier investors, a bunker within the bunker. Now, it was lit up on the thermal schematic. 3 signatures. Stationary. Alive. I stared at it. There were still people down there, possibly uninfected, but the corridor leading there passed directly through E-block junctions. and E-block, according to my data, was crawling. I tapped into the internal movement sensors. Most of the sensors were offline or disabled, but a few of the low-bandwidth fiber lines I'd repaired weeks ago were still active. I watched one show motion in junction E04. It showed 4 blips moving in erratic loops. Pacing. Not random. Searching. I memorized the pattern. Every 12 seconds, the cluster shifted to the right corridor, left one blind. A dead zone. If I was going to make it down to G-block to figure out what these people knew, or what they had to go during that loop cycle. And if I could grab a biometric band off one of the infected in the outer corridor, I might be able to open that executive vault. I looked down at my steel torque wrench. Still intact, good for close range. But it wouldn't do against more than one target. I needed something more effective. I remembered the old armory closet near the drone maintenance workshop. It had been sealed for over a year, left over from when the facility contracted private security for initial construction. I never had reason to touch it, but if it still had anything, stun battens, even riot gear, it might be my only shot. I left the life support core after triple locking the hatch and disabling the biometric reader on the outside. If I died out there, I didn't want anything following me back in. The tunnel to drone maintenance was tight, but I took the subduct under the primary coolant pipe. It wasn't designed for regular foot traffic, crawling space only, maybe 1.2 meters high, but I preferred that to walking exposed in the hallway. 10 minutes of crawling brought me to the rear access vent behind the drone workshop. The door to the old armory was still sealed, but the emergency bolt override was mechanical, not digital. I slid a pry bar from my pack and wedged it under the latch. It took everything I had to leverage the door open silently. Inside was a dusty metal locker marked Security Equipment Do Not Remove. I cracked it. Inside I found one collapsible riot shield, a pair of reinforced gloves, one pre-charged stun baton, 80,000 volts, 2 flashbang units still sealed, a ballistic helmet with sidelight, and 1 battered Glock 19 with a full mag, plus 1 extra, 9mm, 15-round capacity. I almost laughed. I'd never fired a gun in a real scenario. But I'd taken range courses back when I worked for RTM Environmental in Aurora. I knew the basic stances, trigger discipline, and what to do in close quarters. I loaded the mag, chambered around, and strapped the sidelight to the helmet. Then I left the closet and turned toward E-block. The path to the executive vault would take me through a central spine junction with a clear overhead viewing window. It was a known weak point. No cover, no alternate path. If they saw me crossing, I'd have maybe 6 seconds before I was surrounded. I waited at the junction's edge. Watched the thermal feed. Counted the interval. At the 12th second, the blips shifted, like clockwork. I moved. 10 steps, turn. 5 more. Through the archway, down the side tunnel, 40 meters, quiet. Then I felt it. Vibrations through the floor. Running, I spun. Behind me, one of them rounded the corner. Barefoot, torn jumpsuit, mouth open like it was hyperventilating. Its skin was a shade too pale, veins bulging beneath the surface like cables under stretched vinyl. The way it moved was what really hit me. No hesitation, no tactical awareness. Just a straight, unbroken charge like it had nothing left inside it but a pulse and a target. I raised the Glock and braced against the corner. The first round struck it high in the chest. The second hit near the collarbone. It barely slowed down. Its head snapped toward me like it had triangulated my location on instinct alone. I adjusted aim and fired again, this time placing the shot just below the orbital ridge. The impact staggered it. A final round through the bridge of the nose dropped it completely. It skidded across the concrete and stopped a few feet from my boots. Even with the adrenaline, I felt it in my arms, burning from tension, the kick of each shot vibrating into my shoulder. I watched the body carefully for movement, then stepped forward and removed the access wristband. It was still warm, probably just recently infected. The clothes matched the standard VIP loungewear issued on arrival. Logo-stitched fleece, no shoes. His ID tag was missing, but I recognized the tattoo on his forearm. I'd seen this guy once, laughing with another investor over whiskey near the hydroponics corridor. Now, he was nothing but meat. I didn't have time to linger. I turned back toward the elevator shaft leading to G3 and scanned the biometric reader. It accepted the band without delay. The doors opened soundlessly. I stepped in and hit the only active destination. Executive Isolation Wing G3. The descent was slow, longer than expected. 3 full levels dropped me into bedrock, beneath the reinforced concrete layers I'd helped pour back when the facility was still under construction. No windows, no vent shafts, just a vertical tunnel drilled into solid stone. This section had been finished privately. No blueprints, no inspection tags. Just a line item in the budget labeled Asset Contingency. When the doors opened, I was hit with a sterile white glow. Not fluorescent. These were lab-grade LED panels set to 5000 K, designed to reduce visual fatigue. The hallway ahead was tiled in seamless polymer. Clean, quiet, not a single sign of struggle. I moved forward slowly, weapon raised, watching every doorway. There were no cameras, no visible controls, just a single direction to move, forward. At the end of the corridor, I reached a glass security door with a palm scanner. A faint glow indicated it was still powered. I raised the wristband. It didn't react. This wasn't wristband access, it was DNA locked. But just to the right, I noticed an emergency bypass panel, mechanical, likely for technicians. It required a key and a bypass tool. I had neither. Except, I pulled out the universal torque wrench I always carried, set it to low resistance mode, and slowly cracked open the side housing. Inside was a standard MIL STD 1553 data relay. A bus I knew like the back of my hand. I had a jumper clip in my tool pouch, and after 30 seconds of bypassing the lock pulse and isolating the actuator, I managed to override the door latch. The door slid open. I stepped inside. What I saw was nothing like a shelter or a vault. It was a clinical lab, pristine, whitewashed, reinforced. On the left was a long pane of reinforced ballistic glass looking into a room with medical equipment, operating tables, and multiple biohazard hoods. To the right, there were 5 large cryo units labeled with names and barcodes. 3 of them were active. Each one held a person in a medical coma, monitored by remote telemetry. A 4th unit had been opened, empty. And the 5th was shattered from the inside. The glass lay in a curved arc on the floor. The biometric monitors were still trying to reconnect, blinking red with every failed sync. I approached the central terminal. No login screen, just a file list. Project Diathema Controlled Outbreak. I opened the first file and scrolled through line after line of research entries, most written by someone identified only as Dr. H. Langford. She had authored most of the logs, each marked with timestamps, chemical symbols, and patient references. The virus wasn't new. It wasn't a sudden global mutation or an accidental lab leak. It had been synthesized. According to the documents, the initial strain had been developed 10 years ago for military use. Neurobehavioral modulation through a viral vector. The goal had been to incapacitate enemy populations without conventional weapons. What they'd ended up with was something far more aggressive. The virus attacked the amygdala and hippocampus first, severing higher-order cognition and reducing subjects to instinctive, hyper-aggressive carriers. Pain resistance increased. Adrenaline production spiked. Subjects no longer feared death. But most remarkable of all, motor coordination remained intact, sometimes even enhanced. The virus rewired the human brain into a predatory tool. The logs also showed the date of the first controlled exposure, 53 days ago. The subject, patient 0, had been kept under 24-hour observation inside this very wing. The cryo units were meant to store clean samples of the control group, VIPs injected with dormant versions of the virus, insurance policies, promises of immunity packages sold to high-level clients. But it had failed. One of the cryo subjects, the broken pod, was marked with a red V beside the barcode. Subject V5, early emergence neuro-integrated variant. No prior exposure symptoms, broke containment. Time to breach, 2 minutes, 14 seconds. Contact with personnel confirmed. Escape to upper levels confirmed via emergency elevator sequence. Isolation failure noted. That was 39 hours ago. I sat back, processing everything. The outbreak hadn't come from the outside. It started here. The whole billionaire-funded shelter, the quarantines, the airlocks. It had all been cover. They hadn't just been hiding from the virus. They had been hiding with it. A faint hiss from behind me snapped my attention back to the present. I turned. From the far door on the lab's east wall, a woman stepped through. Early 40s. Lab coat, glasses, face pale from cryo-grade lighting. She raised her hand slowly, cautious. She said something. I couldn't hear it, but I could see her mouth move. She wasn't screaming, not yet. I pointed to my ear and shook my head. She nodded, understanding instantly, then pulled a pen from her pocket and wrote on the back of her palm in block letters. "I'm Dr. Langford. You shouldn't be here." I pointed to the cryopod, then to the broken one. She nodded again, eyes bleak. Then she held up 5 fingers, crossed out 1. 4 survivors left, you, me, 2 VIPs in separate safe zones. I gestured for more info. She scribbled quickly on a nearby glass panel using a dry erase marker. They wanted to escape above, to surface. I disabled the lift. They're trapped in upper lounge. Infected are between us and them. I nodded, then signed, slowly. We need to get them. They're still clean? She stared at me, unsure, then wrote, "Yes, for now." The irony hit me like a punch. The 2 people up there, probably the ones who paid for all this, were now stranded, hiding from the very thing they'd helped create. And the only people still able to reach them were a deaf technician and a traumatized virologist with no weapons training. Langford turned to a hidden panel in the wall and opened a compartment. Inside were vials, each in magnetic suspension. She handed me one. She held up 2 fingers, then 1, then mimed inhaling. 2 doses, you and 1 other. That's it. If I took 1, I'd be immune, but only 1 more person could be saved. I thought of Caitlin. Then I thought of the others, the ones who never made it to the lower levels. I clipped the vial to my belt, nodded once, then turned back toward the elevator shaft. Dr. Langford followed, her hands trembling as she clutched a compact case she'd retrieved from the lab, likely containing the other dose of the inhibitor. We didn't speak. There was no need. The gravity of our task filled the silence like pressure in the air. The elevator to the upper lounge was offline. She had locked it down remotely through her lab's secure terminal. Now we'd have to take the maintenance ladders, narrow shafts that ran between structural compartments and equipment conduits, designed for emergency egress, not combat. I pried open the access panel to Ladder Well B, and the air that drifted out was warm, metallic. Not the recycled cool of filtered life support. This air had been exposed to movement, to heat, to decay. We began climbing. The shaft walls echoed faint vibrations through the steel rungs. Not sounds, I couldn't hear them, but the sensation of something large shifting on the level above. Langford climbed slowly behind me. I paused twice to let her catch up. Each stop reminded me how vulnerable we were in that tube. If one of them dropped into the shaft from above, we'd have no angle, no leverage. By the time we reached the upper maintenance hatch, I could see a faint flicker through the edges. Emergency lighting. Not full blackout. The generator must still be holding up. That meant whatever survivors remained hadn't lost total control, yet. I cracked the hatch open just enough to peer through. The lounge level, coded G1 on our internal schematics, was originally built to mimic surface comforts. Wood veneer paneling, artificial skylights tuned to mimic daylight, soft carpeting designed to reduce psychological stress during long-term confinement. Now, it looked like a crime scene staged for a luxury lifestyle magazine. Blood smeared along the walls in long arcs. A glass bar was shattered. Furniture had been overturned and stacked into makeshift barricades. I saw a body slumped near the biometric door, unmoving, pale, head canted at an unnatural angle. I stepped out, pistol raised. Langford crawled behind me, crouching low. I motioned toward the executive hallway. That's where the remaining 2 VIPs would have gone. There were only a few suites with hardened security doors and redundant oxygen supplies. If they were still alive, they'd be there. We moved fast but careful, hugging the walls, stopping at every intersection. Every corner threatened motion. Nothing yet. I spotted a hallway camera, its lens turned to face the ceiling. Disabled. At the junction leading to Suite 01, the hallway bent sharply left, designed that way to prevent clear lines of fire during an armed breach. It also meant we had to take it blind. I crouched and retrieved the inspection mirror from my tool pouch, polished steel on a folding rod. I extended it just past the corner and angled it. 2 people, huddled together by the reinforced suite door. Alive. I slid the mirror back and moved forward slowly, stepping into their view with both hands visible. They startled. One stood, tall, mid-50s, expensive gray undershirt stained with blood. Not his own. He had the look of someone used to authority. The second figure, a woman, maybe late 30s, wearing compression gear and a surgical mask, remained seated, clutching a fire axe. Langford followed and raised her hands. The man said something to me. I didn't respond. He repeated it, louder. Langford stepped between us and signed. "He doesn't hear you." He scoffed. But I watched his body language, tight shoulders, eyes constantly darting behind me. He was scared, but not panicked. Still calculating. Still clinging to some notion of control. Langford took out a marker and scrawled directly on the wall. "We have 1 inhibitor dose left. We came from G3. You are exposed?" The woman nodded quickly. The man didn't. I narrowed my eyes. Langford looked between them, then wrote, "1 dose, 1 choice, we get to decide." That's when I saw it. A twitch, a small, nearly imperceptible flicker of his jaw muscle. It wasn't just adrenaline. It was restraint, like he was fighting something. He noticed me noticing. Langford saw it too. She raised the case. He lunged for it. I stepped forward and drove my shoulder into him, slamming him against the wall. He was strong, far stronger than he should have been. His teeth snapped close to my neck. I shoved him back and fired 2 rounds into his chest. He stumbled but didn't go down. The third shot took him in the throat. He collapsed. Langford knelt beside the woman, checked her eyes. No dilation, no skin discoloration. Clear. I handed her the inhibitor vial. She hesitated, then took a long, deep breath from it. Her body convulsed once. Then she steadied. The last clean survivor. If Langford was right, that meant it was just the three of us now. I motioned toward the exit corridor. The surface elevator required a triple authorization, one from a senior staff member, one from executive clearance, and one from maintenance or engineering. Between Langford and me, we had 2 of the 3. The woman's wristband had executive priority. We made our way through the fire doors, passing by the upper containment zones. I didn't look into them. I already knew what I'd see. The elevator station was intact, still powered. The biometric scanner waited, blinking. I went first, then Langford, then the woman. Green. The elevator doors opened. Air hissed from the change in pressure. We stepped inside. Langford pulled the manual override panel and inserted a key. Her key. The elevator lurched. We began ascending toward the surface for the first time since the outbreak began. It was slow, agonizingly slow. Halfway up, the lights flickered. Then I felt it, an impact, dull but heavy. The car rocked slightly. Something was climbing the shaft. Langford's eyes met mine. No words, just a question. I checked the pistol, 2 rounds left. I reached into my pouch, removed the last flare from my kit and handed it to her. Then I set the pistol on the floor between us. The other woman picked it up, checked the chamber, nodded. The next few minutes were pure waiting. When the elevator finally stopped, we were beneath the old warehouse that covered the facility's surface entrance. A nondescript shipping depot off the side of State Route 163, camouflaged among shuttered logistics offices in Nevada's northern scrublands. The air was dry, dusty. The sky above was orange from smoke, but real, wide, exposed. We stepped out. Behind us, the elevator began to hum again. I turned. Langford shouted something I couldn't hear, but her face said enough. I grabbed a flare, struck it. The elevator doors opened, and 2 infected burst forward, both in shredded maintenance gear, faces barely human. I threw the flare into the shaft and fired my final round into the elevator's emergency brake line. The cables snapped. The car dropped with a roar, screaming infected, vanishing into the darkness below. Silence. Real silence, not just mine. Around us, the desert held its breath. The sky turned above like a bruise on fire. Langford clutched the case to her chest, staring at the empty elevator shaft. The other woman collapsed onto the concrete, looking at the rising sun like she didn't believe it was real. And me? I looked down at my hands. Still shaking. Still alive. The bunker was sealed now, no going back. Whatever came next, we'd face it above ground. With eyes open, with no more secrets whispered in the dark. And for once, even in silence, I finally understood everything. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.